Who knew that installing a hot tub on my own property would turn me into public enemy number one? Apparently, Darla Wexley, the HOA chairwoman, thought she could shut me down like she had with everyone else. Spoiler alert, she was very wrong. Instead of getting me to tear down my hot tub, she ended up handing me the keys to her house, which I promptly turned into the North Haven Sauna Collective. And guess what? It's now open for free to the entire community. Talk about a plot twist. Curious to know what happened next? Drop a comment and let me know if you're ready to join the sauna revolution too. Let me take you back to where this whole mess started. I had just bought this 20-acre ranch from my aunt in North Haven County, Minnesota. Nothing fancy, just an old wooden cabin, a beat-up horse barn, and plenty of open land surrounded by pine trees. After nearly 2 decades of city life, spent mostly crammed into a tiny apartment and enduring endless client demands, I was absolutely starving for quiet. My heating and sauna installation business had been good to me, but the constant grind, the noise, the sheer density of people, it was suffocating. I needed space to breathe, to think, to finally reconnect with the kind of solitude that makes you feel truly alive. This 20-acre ranch, a legacy from my aunt, wasn't just land. It was my escape hatch, my chance to reclaim a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. The plan was simple. Work remotely on my heating system projects, and finally have space to test my products properly. The first thing I wanted to test, a 6-person outdoor hot tub that I'd been dying to try in sub-zero temperatures. I figured December in Minnesota was the perfect time to see how well these babies really worked when it got brutal outside. So there I was on a Tuesday morning, temperature hovering right around freezing, with 2 of my guys helping me install this beautiful hot tub right in front of the cabin. The snow was just starting to fall, creating these perfect little white dots on the water's surface. I was adjusting the final pipe connections when I heard a car door slam from the direction of the main road. 10 minutes after we fired up the system, as the first tendrils of steam began to dance gracefully into the crisp air, a shadow fell across the pristine snow. A woman, a glaring streak of red against the white snow, marched across my property like she owned it, her ridiculous fur coat billowing like a flag of entitlement. She's carrying a clipboard like she's conducting some kind of official inspection. "Do you have permits for this installation?" she demands, not even bothering to introduce herself. "This is a violation of community aesthetic standards." I'm still holding my wrench, looking at this woman who just appeared out of nowhere, and I can't help myself. "Are you playing cop or the snow fairy?" I ask her. Big mistake. She reaches into her coat and pulls out this yellowed piece of paper, throwing it in my direction. "Read Section 15.3 about community responsibility," she shouts. The paper lands in the snow, and I can see it's some kind of HOA rules from 1994, complete with coffee stains and everything. This lady, who I later learned was Darla Wexley, chairwoman of the North Haven Heights HOA, starts going off about how my ranch is polluting the visual environment of the entire county and how my hot tub violates regional aesthetic standards. I try to explain, politely at first, that my ranch sits outside any HOA boundaries, and I've got the property deeds to prove it. But she cuts me off. "I don't care about your paperwork. The community has a right to protection." Now, I've dealt with difficult customers before, but this woman has a special kind of crazy in her eyes. She's got this whole speech prepared about environmental visual pollution and community standards, like she's been practicing it in the mirror. I figure she's just having a bad day, maybe going through some personal stuff, so I keep my cool. "Look, ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is private property. You're welcome to check with the county if you have questions about boundaries." Wrong thing to say. Her face goes red, matching her ridiculous coat, and she points that clipboard at me like it's a weapon. "We'll see about that," she hisses, and storms off through the snow, leaving these angry little footprints behind her. I thought that was the end of it. Maybe she'd go home, cool off, realize she was being crazy, and that would be that. I spent the rest of the afternoon testing the hot tub, and man, it was perfect. Steam rising up into the cold air, temperature holding steady at 104 degrees while it's 32 outside. This is exactly why I wanted the ranch, space to work and test my products without bothering anyone. As the sun went down and the snow kept falling, I'm thinking about how peaceful this place is going to be. No city noise, no neighbors complaining about construction sounds, just me and 20 acres of Minnesota wilderness. I fired up the cabin's wood stove, made some coffee, and settled in for a quiet evening, watching the snow accumulate on the hot tub cover through the window. The silence was incredible, just the occasional crack of settling wood and the soft hum of the hot tub's filtration system. This was going to be perfect. But at 6 o'clock the next morning, I woke up to flashing red lights cutting through the early dawn snow. Through my cabin window, I could see a sheriff's patrol car parked at the end of my dirt driveway, red and blue lights reflecting off the fresh white snow like some kind of winter disco. And there, standing next to the car in that same red coat, pointing at my hot tub like she's reporting a crime scene, was Darla Wexley. That's when I realized I'd completely underestimated what I was dealing with. This wasn't just some cranky neighbor having a bad day. This woman was serious about her campaign against my hot tub, and she was just getting started. By Wednesday, I wasn't even surprised when Mitch showed up at the door, eyes tired from a week of handling Darla's complaints. "Here we go again," he said as we walked past the hot tub for yet another pointless check. Behind him, Darla stands next to his patrol car, arms crossed, watching like she's supervising some major criminal bust. Mitch knocks on my door with the tired patience of a man who's seen everything twice. "Morning, Mr. Renshaw. Got a noise complaint about your filtration system disturbing the peace." I invite him in for coffee and we walk over to the hot tub together. The disturbing noise turns out to be the gentle hum of the pump motor, about as loud as a refrigerator running. Mitch runs his decibel meter over it, shakes his head, and mutters, "This is the quietest hot tub in history." I'm starting to see the humor in this situation, but I can tell Mitch is getting annoyed. As he's packing up his gear, he mentions that Mrs. Wexley used to work for the county health department before she got fired 3 years ago for some kind of budget scandal. "She's been the HOA chair ever since," he adds. "Keeps her busy, I guess." Tuesday brought complaint number 2, steam pollution affecting air quality and visibility for drivers. This time, Mitch shows up with an actual environmental testing kit, like he's investigating some kind of chemical spill. We stand there watching wisps of water vapor rise gently into the morning air while he takes readings. "Sir," he says with the straightest face possible, "this appears to be regular water vapor, like what comes out of your coffee cup, but more of it." Wednesday, safety violation due to lack of protective barriers. Thursday, interference with community Wi-Fi signals. Friday, suspicious nighttime activity with unusual lighting. Saturday, violation of wastewater disposal regulations. By Sunday, when she called about suspected illegal commercial activity, I'd started keeping a log of every interaction. I even made myself a little chart that I taped to my cabin window. The hot tub crime map, listing each day's offense according to Darla. My nearest neighbor, old Mr. Jenkins from half a mile down the road, came by to check out the police chaos, then nearly fell over laughing at my hot tub crime map. The thing is, each call was getting more desperate, more reaching. Darla was clearly running out of legitimate-sounding complaints and starting to make stuff up. The Wi-Fi thing was particularly ridiculous. My hot tub runs on a basic electrical circuit, not exactly the kind of setup that interferes with internet signals. But she'd researched just enough technical terminology to sound halfway credible when she called it in. I had to admire her dedication, even if it was completely insane. She'd apparently spent hours researching municipal codes and county regulations, looking for anything she could twist into a violation. The woman was treating this like a full-time job. By the weekend, Mitch and I had developed a silent, almost comedic understanding. His visits, once an annoyance, had become a strange sort of morning ritual. He'd show up. We'd go through the motions of investigating Darla's latest absurdity, a performance for her benefit, really. Then he'd document 0 violations, often with a subtle eye roll that spoke volumes. Afterwards, we'd usually end up talking about more interesting stuff. The best fishing spots in the county, his kids' hockey team, or even, ironically, the technical specs of my hot tub. He was genuinely fascinated by the hydrotherapy jets, I think. 20 years in law enforcement, he tells me on Sunday after complaint number 7, and this is the weirdest week of my career. Mrs. Wexley tried this same thing with old Henderson about 2 years ago, wanted him to cut down his sunflowers because they were excessively tall. That's when I started to understand I wasn't dealing with an isolated incident. This was Darla's pattern. She'd pick a target, find some excuse to harass them, and then use the legal system to make their lives miserable until they gave up and moved away or gave in to her demands. But I'm not old Henderson. My patience, usually a finite resource, was inexplicably growing. My bank account, more surprisingly, was ready for a fight if it came to that. And honestly, I was starting to find this whole situation wildly entertaining. Each morning, I'd wake up with a perverse sense of anticipation, like a kid on Christmas Eve. What creative, utterly ridiculous complaint would Darla concoct next? Would today be the day she accused my hot tub of attracting dangerous, steam-loving wildlife? Or of violating some obscure 1950s ordinance about excessive water vapor emissions? The suspense, I swear, was almost killing me. And more importantly, I was learning things about Darla with each interaction. She always called at exactly the same time, 6 a.m. on the dot. She always used the same phrase. "This is Darla Wexley, chairwoman of the North Haven Heights Homeowners Association, and I need to report a violation." And she always wore that same red coat when she showed up to watch the proceedings, like it was some kind of official uniform that gave her authority. What she didn't know was that I'd started recording our conversations, documenting every interaction, and doing a little research of my own. If Darla wanted to play the long game, I was more than happy to join her, but I had a feeling she wasn't going to like how this particular game was going to end. After a week of daily police visits, I decided it was time to change strategies. Instead of just sitting around waiting for Darla's next complaint, I was going to get proactive. And the best way to beat someone who thinks they represent the community? Actually help the community. My first stop was the Thompson place, this little house at the end of Maple Road where an elderly couple had been struggling with their heating bill all winter. I'd noticed their windows were always fogged up from poor ventilation and figured they could use some help. So I loaded up my truck with materials and drove over to offer them a free floor heating installation. Nothing fancy, just a basic radiant system that would cut their heating costs in half and make their house actually comfortable for the first time in years. Word spreads fast in a small community, especially when someone's doing something nice for the local elderly folks. While I'm crawling around under the Thompsons' house running heating lines, neighbors start stopping by to watch the work. That's when I start hearing the real stories about Darla Wexley. Mrs. Jenkins from 2 houses down tells me about getting cited for Christmas lights that were excessively bright. An older gentleman mentions getting fined for cutting his grass to the wrong height, according to some HOA specification that Darla made up on the spot. A young woman talks about being written up for painting her front door blue instead of regulation white. Every single person had a Darla story, and none of them were good. But the most revealing conversation came from Mrs. Thompson while I was fitting their new heating system, and it wasn't just about the weather. She's making me coffee and chatting about how nice it is to have someone helping out when she mentions almost casually that she heard Darla's having money troubles. Got fired from her job at the county for something to do with missing budget money, she says, stirring sugar into her cup. I heard her house was on the brink of foreclosure. Tough break, but maybe it'd finally cool her flames. That little piece of information gets filed away in the back of my mind for later use. Financial pressure would explain why Darla's been so aggressive about asserting her authority lately. Losing her job and facing foreclosure would make anyone desperate to feel like they still had control over something. While I'm working, I notice Darla's car driving slowly past the Thompson house multiple times. On the third pass, I see her parked at the corner with what looks like binoculars, actually surveying my work like she's conducting some kind of surveillance operation. The woman was absolutely pathologically obsessed. Mrs. Thompson noticed too, shaking her head with a mix of pity and exasperation. That poor woman, she sighed, needs a hobby that doesn't involve bothering her neighbors. But as I watched Darla through the Thompsons' window, a cold certainty settled in. This went deeper than just needing a hobby. This felt intensely personal for Darla, like my very presence, my refusal to bend, was a direct affront to her crumbling sense of self. Maybe it was the fact that I was doing whatever I wanted on my own property without asking her permission. Maybe it was because I didn't immediately back down when she tried to intimidate me. Or perhaps, and this was the growing suspicion, she was just used to being the person everyone was terrified of, and I, infuriatingly, wasn't playing along with her twisted game. I was exposing her weakness, and she hated it. The community support was nothing short of incredible. People who had been quietly putting up with Darla's harassment for years were finally seeing someone stand up to her, someone who refused to be bullied, and they were rallying around the cause with an almost palpable sense of relief. Mrs. Jenkins brought me homemade cookies, still warm from her oven, her eyes twinkling with gratitude. The guy with the 2 tall sunflowers, a quiet man named Robert, offered to help with any construction projects I might have, his voice firm with solidarity. Even some families from the HOA community, tired of Darla's constant, suffocating supervision of their daily lives, started driving out to my ranch just to show their support. It was like the entire neighborhood had been holding its breath for years, living under a silent, oppressive weight, and Darla's impotent rage had finally given them collective permission to exhale. And more importantly, they're starting to see me as someone who contributes positively to the neighborhood, instead of just some outsider causing trouble. When you help people with practical stuff like staying warm in winter, they remember that. They also start talking, and what they're saying about Darla isn't flattering. It turns out most of the neighborhood has been quietly putting up with her bullying for years, afraid to speak up because she controlled the HOA and had connections at the county from her old job. But those connections are gone now, and people are getting tired of walking on eggshells around someone who doesn't even have any real authority over them. By the end of the week, I've got a much clearer picture of what I'm dealing with. Darla clung to the HOA chairmanship like a sinking ship. She once had power, but now it was all she had left to keep her from drowning in the loss of everything she once controlled. My ranch and my hot tub represent everything she can't stand. Someone doing what they want without her approval, someone who isn't intimidated by her authority, and someone who's showing the community that you don't have to live in fear of Darla Wexley. But I'm also learning that she's vulnerable. The money problems Mrs. Thompson mentioned, the isolation from her neighbors, the desperate need to prove she still matters, these are all pressure points I can work with if I need to. What I don't expect is how quickly Darla escalates things. Friday afternoon, I get a call from Mitch warning me that she's organized an emergency HOA meeting for Monday night with the topic, Addressing Serious Steam Pollution Threats to Community Health. Apparently, she's been going door to door all week, trying to drum up support for her crusade against my hot tub. Though, from what Mitch heard, most people just politely listened and then closed their doors. Still, the fact that she's calling a public meeting means she's preparing for a bigger fight. And honestly, I'm looking forward to it. Because I've got a feeling that when Darla puts herself in front of the entire community to rant about my hot tub, it's not going to go the way she's expecting. The following Monday, I learned just how far Darla was willing to go. I came home from a job site around 6 p.m. to find my cabin dark and cold. Not just chilly, I'm talking about that bone-deep cold that hits you when there's been no heat for hours. The temperature plummeted to a bone-chilling 15 below zero. My breath a visible ghost, a silent warning of the cold that gripped me. My fingers, numb from gripping the frozen doorknob, fumbled for the light switch. The cabin was a tomb of bone-deep cold, the kind that steals the warmth from your body, then your very will to move. No electricity, no running water, no heat. In the heart of a Minnesota winter, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a potentially lethal act. People die from this kind of cold. This wasn't merely harassment anymore. This was a chilling, deliberate attempt to force me off my property, to break me, to put me in actual danger. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Darla had crossed a line, a very dark, dangerous line. I dialed the electric company from my frozen cabin, bundled in my coat, my breath clouding the air as if the cold itself was mocking me. The customer service rep tells me they received a complaint from the North Haven Forest Environmental Committee about my electrical system causing community Wi-Fi interference and ecosystem disruption. According to their records, someone claiming to be an official environmental representative had provided detailed technical explanations about how my setup was damaging the local environment and interfering with neighborhood internet service. The complaint was so detailed and official sounding that they'd shut off my service pending an investigation. When I asked for more details about this environmental committee, the rep couldn't provide any contact information because the caller had said they were conducting an ongoing investigation and couldn't be reached directly. That's when I knew exactly who was behind this. Darla had researched enough technical terminology to sound like she knew what she was talking about and had claimed to represent some official organization that didn't actually exist. She'd used her background in county government to understand exactly which buttons to push and which words to use to get the utility company to take action. And she'd timed it perfectly for the coldest night of the year, when losing heat could actually be dangerous. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was starting to feel like a deliberate attempt to force me off my property. I bundled up and trudged through the deep snow, anger flaring as I neared her house. The walk felt like it would take forever, but every step brought me closer to settling this. Not just because of the inconvenience, but because this was potentially dangerous. You don't mess with someone's heat in Minnesota winter. People can die from that kind of thing. When I finally reached her house, trudging through snow that muffled every sound, her windows glowed with a warm, inviting light. It felt like a deliberate taunt. I knocked, a hard, echoing rap that belied the numb ache in my knuckles. Darla answered, wrapped in a plush bathrobe and slippers, a picture of smug, cozy comfort. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, a faint scent of chamomile tea wafted from within. I, meanwhile, stood there, a frost-covered apparition, my breath clouding around me, icicles practically forming on my eyebrows. The sheer audacity, the deliberate cruelty of her comfort while my home was a frozen box ignited a cold fury within me unlike anything I'd felt before. This wasn't just about my hot tub anymore. It was personal. It was dangerous, and she was going to pay. "Darla, I know you called the power company," I said, skipping any pretense at politeness. "Call them back and tell them it was a mistake. Right now." She gives me this innocent look like she has no idea what I'm talking about. "I don't know what you're referring to, and this is private property. You have no right to be here making accusations." But I can see it in her eyes. She knows exactly what she did, and she's proud of it. "It's 15 below zero," I tell her. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This could be dangerous." That's when her mask slips a little, and I see something that looks almost like satisfaction. "Maybe you should have thought about community impact before you decided to pollute our environment," she says, and starts to close the door. That's when Troy Halbrook steps out from behind a snow-covered pine tree next to her driveway. I hadn't even noticed him there, but apparently he'd been watching Darla's house for most of the evening. "I recorded the whole phone call," he says, holding up his phone. "She spent 20 minutes on the phone with the electric company this afternoon, claiming to be from the Forest Environmental Committee. Want to hear it?" Turns out Troy had been documenting Darla's behavior for months, ever since she'd sued him for hanging wind chimes that were aesthetically disruptive. He'd been quietly gathering evidence of her harassment campaigns, waiting for the right moment to use it. And tonight, when she crossed the line from annoying to actually dangerous, he decided it was time to step up. Listening to that recording was like hearing a masterclass in manipulation. Darla had used every piece of technical jargon she could find, claiming my hot tub's electrical system was somehow interfering with critical community infrastructure and disrupting the local ecosystem balance. She'd made herself sound like some kind of environmental scientist conducting an official investigation, rather than an angry neighbor with a personal grudge. But she'd also made a crucial mistake. She'd claimed to represent an organization that didn't exist and had provided false information to a utility company, which was actually illegal. For the first time since this whole thing started, Darla had crossed a line that could get her in real trouble. Standing there in the snow, listening to my breath form clouds in the 15 below air, looking at Darla's warm, comfortable house, while mine sat dark and cold, I made a decision. This wasn't about a hot tub anymore. This was about someone who thought they could use intimidation and harassment to control their neighbors. Someone who was willing to put people in danger to get their way. "Game over, Darla," I said, loud enough for her to hear through her closed door. "I'm going to turn your cozy little house into the biggest steam room in North Haven County." And for the first time since this whole thing started, I knew exactly how I was going to make that happen. The next morning, I called the electric company back with Troy's recording and had my power restored within 2 hours. Turns out filing false reports to utility companies is a serious offense, and they were very apologetic about the whole situation. But I wasn't interested in apologies anymore. I was interested in solutions, and the solution that kept rattling around in my head was what Mrs. Thompson had mentioned about Darla's financial troubles. If she was really facing foreclosure, that created opportunities. So I decided to do a little digging. My first stop was the county courthouse to look up public records on Darla's property. I dug through the records and found multiple liens stacked against her house, including a hefty mortgage that was 3 months overdue. The property was valued at around $180,000, but she owed nearly $200,000 between the original mortgage and accumulated penalty. She was in deep financial trouble, and it was only a matter of time before the bank started foreclosure proceedings. The question was whether I could get there first. I've done enough heating installations for local businesses to know most of the key players in town, including Dave Johnson, who runs the North Haven Community Bank. Dave and I have worked together on several commercial projects, and he's always been straight with me about business matters. So I drove down to the bank and had a conversation with him about potentially purchasing a distressed property in the area. I didn't mention Darla by name, but I laid out a hypothetical scenario about someone interested in buying a house that was heading toward foreclosure. Dave explained that in situations like that, banks are often willing to work with serious cash buyers who can close quickly and avoid the legal hassles of foreclosure proceedings. The math was actually pretty simple. I had enough savings from my heating business to buy Darla's house outright, and the bank would much rather deal with a direct sale than go through months of foreclosure paperwork. From their perspective, getting $180,000 immediately was much better than spending 6 months in legal proceedings that might only net them $150,000 after attorney fees and court costs. Dave agreed to make some discreet inquiries about a property on Maple Street that might be available for quick purchase. While this was all happening behind the scenes, Darla was getting more desperate and more reckless. She'd started what she called a community awareness campaign about steam pollution, which mostly consisted of her standing outside my ranch with a handmade sign that said "Stop Steam Pollution," while wearing that ridiculous red coat. The sight of a 57-year-old woman standing alone in the snow protesting a hot tub that was completely legal and not bothering anyone was so absurd that people started driving by just to see the show. Some of my new friends from the community even began stopping by my ranch in the evenings just to sit in the hot tub and wave at Darla during her protests. In a small town, word spreads faster than wildfire, especially when someone's lending a hand to those who've been ignored. People who had been quietly putting up with Darla's harassment for years were finally seeing someone stand up to her, and they were rallying around the cause. Mrs. Jenkins brought me homemade cookies. The guy with the 2 tall sunflowers offered to help with any construction projects I might have. Even some families from the HOA community started driving out to my ranch just to show their support and get away from Darla's constant supervision of their daily activities. It was like the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath for years, and now they could finally exhale. But the real breakthrough came when Dave called me with news that Darla had agreed to meet with a potential buyer for her house. She was desperate enough that she didn't even ask many questions, just wanted to know if they were serious and could close quickly. Dave had presented it as an investor looking for properties in the area, and she jumped at the chance. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, and I'd finally get to see just how far Darla had fallen from her days as a powerful county supervisor. What made the whole situation even more perfect was that Darla had no idea who the potential buyer was. She was so focused on her campaign against my hot tub that she hadn't bothered to ask Dave for details about the investor. She was just desperate to get out from under her financial problems and probably figured she could move somewhere else and start fresh with a new set of neighbors to terrorize. The irony, the sheer, exquisite poetic justice of it all was a delicious weight in my stomach. Here was Darla Wexley, the woman who had unleashed a relentless campaign of harassment, legal threats, and even dangerous sabotage to drive me from my land, now unwittingly agreeing to sell her most prized possession to her greatest adversary. The person she'd been trying to drive away was about to become her financial salvation. She was so consumed by her petty crusade against my hot tub, so blinded by her own desperation, that she hadn't bothered to ask any real questions about this investor. She was just a desperate, cornered animal, clutching at the first lifeline offered, completely oblivious to the hand extended was mine. It was beautiful, truly, beautifully ironic. Thursday evening, Dave called with the news I'd been waiting for. She said yes to your offer, wants to close as soon as possible. Darla Wexley, chairwoman of the North Haven Heights HOA, terror of local homeowners, and self-appointed protector of community standards, had just agreed to sell her house to the guy with the hot tub she'd been trying to get rid of for weeks. And the best part? She still had no idea what was coming. Darla had scheduled her emergency HOA meeting for 7 p.m. Monday night at the community center, with the official topic being addressing serious steam pollution threats to community health and safety. She'd spent the weekend going door to door trying to drum up attendance, using her most official tone to convince people that my hot tub represented some kind of existential threat to the neighborhood. What she didn't know was that several of those same neighbors had called me to give me a heads up about the meeting and to let me know they'd be there to support me if things got heated. I spent Sunday afternoon preparing my own materials for the meeting. Instead of boring legal documents or technical specifications, I made a simple poster board with large, clear lettering that read, "Welcome to the North Haven Sauna Collective. Future owner requests permission to speak." I figured if Darla wanted to make this a public spectacle, I might as well make it memorable. The plan was simple. Let her present her case against my hot tub to the community, then announce my purchase of her house and my plans to convert it into a public sauna. If she wanted to play the community card, I was going to trump her with actual community benefit. Monday night, I arrived at the community center about 10 minutes after the meeting started. Through the windows, I could see it was packed, the biggest turnout for an HOA meeting in years, according to several people I knew. Darla had clearly invested a lot of energy in promoting this event, probably thinking she was finally going to get the community support she needed to force me out. I waited outside until I heard her really getting into her presentation, then made my entrance. The scene inside was exactly what I'd hoped for. 35 people packed into a room designed for 20, with Darla standing at the front wearing a business suit and pointing to a hand-drawn chart showing the environmental dangers of steam pollution. She'd clearly spent hours preparing this presentation, complete with printouts of various municipal codes and environmental regulations that she claimed my hot tub was violating. The steam emissions from this illegal installation are disrupting our community's air quality and creating visual pollution that affects property values throughout the region, she was saying as I walked in the back door. The room went completely quiet when people noticed me. Darla stopped mid-sentence and turned around to see what had captured everyone's attention. When she saw me standing there with my poster board, her face went through several interesting color changes, finally settling on a shade of red that matched her favorite coat. "You have no right to be here," she said, pointing at me like I was some kind of intruder. "This is a private HOA meeting for community members only." But several people in the audience immediately spoke up to invite me to join the discussion, including Mrs. Jenkins and the man with the sunflowers, who were apparently also HOA members. I walked to the front of the room and turned my poster board around so everyone could see it. "I just wanted to let everyone know that I've purchased the house at 42 Maple Street for $180,000, and I'll be converting it into a community sauna that'll be free for everyone to use 3 days a week." The room erupted. Some people started applauding, others began asking questions about the details, and a few were clearly trying to figure out what this meant for Darla's ongoing campaign against my hot tub. But Darla herself just stood there in complete shock for about 10 seconds, like her brain was trying to process information that didn't make sense. Then she exploded. "No, that's my house! You can't just buy someone's house. This is illegal. This is harassment. This is..." And then she completely lost it, screaming at the top of her lungs about how she was the law in this community and everyone had to listen to her and respect her authority. "I am the law here. I decide what happens. You all have to obey me." She was pointing at random people in the audience, her carefully prepared presentation forgotten, her professional demeanor completely shattered. It was like watching someone have a complete psychological breakdown in real time. The transformation was shocking. This woman who had spent weeks trying to present herself as a reasonable community leader, concerned about environmental issues, suddenly revealed herself as someone with serious control issues and a completely distorted view of her own authority. People in the audience started looking uncomfortable, then concerned, then almost embarrassed for her. Mrs. Jenkins actually got up and tried to calm her down, but Darla just kept ranting about how everyone had to obey her rules and respect her position as chairwoman. Troy, who had been quietly recording everything on his phone, caught the whole meltdown on video. The meeting essentially ended when Darla stormed out of the room, still shouting about lawsuits and authority and how everyone would regret not supporting her. The remaining 34 people sat in stunned silence for a moment, then burst into the most animated discussion I'd ever seen at a community meeting. People who had been quietly enduring Darla's harassment for years suddenly felt free to share their stories. Others wanted to know more about my sauna plans. Several offered to help with the renovation work. It was like the entire community had been holding its breath for years, and Darla's public breakdown had finally given them permission to exhale. As I was packing up my poster board, Mrs. Jenkins came over to shake my hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "We've all been waiting for someone to stand up to her, but nobody wanted to be the target of her attention. You did what the rest of us were too scared to do." And that's when I realized this had never really been about my hot tub at all. It had been about someone who used fear and intimidation to control her neighbors, and a community that was finally ready to say enough was enough. The paperwork for Darla's house took exactly 2 weeks to complete. Dave Johnson expedited everything through the bank, and Darla signed the documents without even reading them carefully. She was so desperate to get out from under her financial problems that she just wanted the whole thing over with. The only time she spoke to me directly during the process was a brief phone call the day before closing. "I want you to know that I'm sorry for how things got out of hand," she said, her voice completely different from the aggressive tone I'd gotten used to. "I don't know what happened to me. I used to be a reasonable person. I told her everyone deserved a second chance and that I hoped she'd find peace wherever she ended up. She mentioned moving to Florida to live with her sister and starting over completely. The renovation work began immediately after closing. I'd underestimated how much community support there would be for the project. Mrs. Jenkins organized a volunteer schedule. The man with the sunflowers, whose name turned out to be Robert Martinez, donated lumber from his property. Even Mitch Finner stopped by after his shifts to help with electrical work, joking that this was much more fun than responding to hot tub emergency calls. The house was perfect for conversion. Good bones, solid construction, and a layout that worked well for a community space. We turned the living room into a traditional Finnish-style sauna with proper cedar wood and a professional heating system. The bedrooms became relaxation areas with comfortable seating and reading materials. The backyard got a cold plunge area for the full sauna experience. The North Haven Sauna Collective officially opened on the first Saturday in February, exactly 1 month after Darla moved to Florida. We decided on a schedule of Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday afternoons, free for anyone in the community. The response was incredible. The first week brought 20 people, from elderly couples looking for relief from winter aches to young families wanting to try something new. Troy Halbrook became the unofficial schedule coordinator, managing reservations and making sure everyone got a chance to use the facilities. Even some people from the HOA community started coming regularly, finally able to relax without worrying about violating some arbitrary rule that Darla might have made up. The sauna quickly became much more than just a place to sweat. It turned into an unofficial community center where people actually talked to each other instead of just waving from their driveways. It wasn't just the heat that brought them in, it was the sense of belonging, of finally being part of something where everyone was welcomed. People came to share stories, to laugh, to help each other. The quiet winter nights that had once felt endless now felt full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, North Haven truly felt like home. The sauna wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of everything Darla had tried to destroy and everything we'd built together. Mrs. Thompson and her husband became regulars, saying the heat helped with their arthritis better than any medication they'd tried. A group of local women started doing yoga sessions in the relaxation room. Some teenagers convinced their parents to let them organize study groups there during the week. Even Dave Johnson from the bank started stopping by, joking that this was the best return on investment he'd ever seen from a distressed property purchase. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the house, which had belonged to someone who tried to control every aspect of her neighbors' lives, had become a place where people came together freely and voluntarily. We put up a simple sign by the front door: North Haven Sauna Collective, community space for everyone. No rules, no regulations, no membership fees, just a warm, welcoming place where people could escape from Minnesota winters and connect with their neighbors. It was everything Darla's version of community leadership had failed to be. 6 months later, on a particularly cold night in August, I'm sitting in my original hot tub, the one that started this whole adventure. The temperature is 20 below zero, but the water is a perfect 104 degrees, creating thick clouds of steam that rise up into the starry sky. From my ranch, I can see the warm yellow glow of lights in the sauna building, and I can hear the gentle murmur of conversation from the dozen people who are in there tonight, escaping from the cold and enjoying each other's company. The barn behind me has been converted into my workshop, and I've got more heating installation jobs than I can handle, mostly from people who heard about my community work and want to support my business. Darla sends a Christmas card every year from St. Petersburg, where she's apparently found peace working as a volunteer at a senior center. No attempts to control anyone, no harassment campaigns, just quiet service, helping people who need assistance. Her cards are brief but genuine, usually just a note saying she's doing well and hopes everyone in North Haven is happy. I always send one back, updating her on how the sauna's doing and letting her know she's welcome to visit if she's ever back in Minnesota. Recovery is possible for everyone, even people who lose their way as badly as she did. Tonight, as I watch the steam from my hot tub mix with the chimney smoke from the community sauna, I can't help but smile at how this all worked out. A woman who tried to drive me away ended up giving me the opportunity to create something that brought the entire community together. The house she used as a base for harassment and control became a space for relaxation and connection. The neighbors she tried to intimidate became the volunteers who made it all possible. Sometimes the best way to deal with someone who's trying to tear things down is to build something so positive that their negativity just gets overwhelmed by all the good energy. Sitting in my hot tub in the middle of a Minnesota winter, listening to the sound of laughter and conversation from the North Haven Sauna Collective, the house that used to belong to the woman who called the cops on me 7 times in 1 week for the crime of installing a hot tub on my own ranch, I can't imagine a more perfect ending to this story. Did I regret having to deal with Darla Wexley and all her harassment? Looking at that warm glow from the community sauna, where 15 neighbors are currently relaxing in the steam and enjoying each other's company in the middle of a 20 below night, all I can say is, yeah, it was completely worth it.
From the whispers to the wreckage, QA Stories brings it all. Click that next video, if you can handle it.